The movie opens with Callum receiving a call from someone asking him to meet him in a quarter of an hour. He sent him the address where they will meet, but Callum told him he couldn't meet him now because he was at work. But this person threatens Callum that if he does not come, he will show his pictures to his mother and his fiancée. Because of that, he gets nervous and decides to leave work and go to this person. But on the way, he witnesses a traffic accident, and he gets very nervous, afraid that he will be late to reach the person, so he decides to call the emergency department in order to report the accident. Emergency people ask him to check if the people who were involved in the accident are dead or alive. But he was afraid and he asked them not to hang up. When he got out of his car to make sure, he found a person lying on the ground and a dead girl. Suddenly, the person lying on the ground gets up and electrocutes Callum. Then the police arrive at the scene. When Detective John Luther arrives there, he learns that the dead girl in the car is called Chris, and she has been missing for 7 years. Forensic medicine proved that this girl had died a long time ago and had been placed in the snow. Luther asks them about the person who reported the accident. He learns that the name of the person who reported the accident is Callum, and he knew that Callum left the workplace suddenly and left without any reasons, and when he witnessed the traffic accident, he reported it, but after that he disappeared, and no one knows anything about him. Corinne, Callum's mother, was at the scene, and she asked to speak with Detective Luther, who agreed to speak with her after learning that she was Callum's mother. She asked him to promise that he would find her son because she could not live without him. He sympathizes with her and tells her that he will do his best in this case. Meanwhile, we notice a person named David among the crowd at the scene. Then we find out that David is the one who caused this crime. He calls someone and asks him to know everything about Detective Luther. He also tells him to know that Luther is a corrupt detective, but he wants proof of that. With time, we see that Luther was arrested on charges of taking bribes from the defendants, and he was sentenced to 10 years in prison. We watch David watch the news about Luther and find out that he was behind it. After that, we watch Luther in prison and see that the rest of the prisoners did not like him because they knew that he was an interrogator and they wanted to beat him. They are waiting for the right opportunity to attack him, and they did. Corinne receives a call from her son, Callum, telling her of his whereabouts and asking her to come and rescue him. She goes to the place without hesitation, and when she arrived, she found the door of the house open, so she called Callum, but the phone was switched off. She enters the house and calls out for Callum. She hears the sound of a phone bell in the room, and when she entered the room, she found her son killed along with 7 other young men. She discovers that the call she received from her son was a previous recording. This is the same way that happened with the families of the other young men who also entered the room and saw their children. Suddenly the place is on fire and Corinne notices that there is a person wearing a mask watching them from behind the glass, but she had to run away before the whole place caught fire. Detective Odette Rain is assigned to the murder case of the 7 youths. When she went to the crime scene, she found that all the bodies were charred. After that, she held a meeting with her assistants and asked them to find something in common between these young men, hoping that they would find the killer. We watch a letter reach Luther in prison. He opens the paper and sees a number written on it. He notes that the number is for the frequency broadcast on the radio. When he turned on the radio and set the frequency, he heard Callum's voice suffering. He also heard a voice of a person telling him that he was the one who kidnapped Callum and was the reason he was put in prison. He told him that they had met at the train station and he was standing in front of him and looked straight into his eyes and tried to test Luther's sixth sense that distinguishes between evil people. But at the time he couldn't make out his character. Suddenly the guard enters and tells him that he has a visit. He was surprised and did not know who had come to visit him. Corinne is the one who came to visit him, and she tells him that he is the reason for what happened to her son, because he is a liar, because he promised her that he would find her son, but he did not. She leaves him and leaves, and when she leaves we find out that David is waiting for her outside. We discover that they have known each other for a short time, but he had told her his name was Tommy. Luther returned to his cell and pulled out a phone he had hidden under the bed. He called Rain and told her about the message that he had received in prison. He was trying to help her solve the case, but she asked him not to interfere. She tells him that he is now a prisoner, not an interrogator like before. After hanging up, she asks her assistant to call the prison administration and tell them that Luther has a phone. Meanwhile, Luther contacts a thief named Dennis. He asked him to help him escape from prison in order to catch the criminal. Dennis refuses, telling him he doesn't trust him. Luther tells him that he knows he hates such criminals because of what happened to his mother when he was young, and because of that he called him. Suddenly the guards enter the cell and take the phone from him. The next day, he asked 2 of his friends from the prison guards to help him and transfer him from this prison to escape. He tells them that this will not happen only when they allow the rest of the prisoners to attack him. They were worried about him because the prisoners might kill him, but because of his insistence, they agree. At night he starts to implement the plan, where they had agreed with a prisoner to pretend that he was trying to commit suicide so that they would turn on the siren. When they tried to stop him, he beat them, and he took the keys to open the cells of the rest of the prisoners in order to attack Luther. Indeed, the plan went exactly as they wanted. Luther was in his cell, waiting for the moment to attack him. When he felt that they had approached him, he placed the bed on the door of the cell to prevent them from entering it. But the prisoners poured petrol and set the room on fire. He was trying to protect himself from the fire with the mattress. When the prisoners entered upon him, he threw the bed mattress on them. But the prisoners attack him and a fierce battle takes place between them, until the prison guards intervened and threw them with water and removed Luther from among the prisoners, and they decided to transfer him to another prison as he wanted. But on their way to the other prison, there were cars that crossed their path, and masked people descended from these cars, attacking the guards and taking Luther. We find out that Dennis helped him escape, so Luther thanks him. At this time David is on his way to visit a woman in the hospital. We discover that this woman is his wife, and she was involved in an accident that caused her body to be disfigured. We discover that David does all these crimes because he wants to avenge his wife. He believed that everyone should suffer as his wife suffers. With time, Rain discovers that Luther has escaped from prison. She goes to meet Martin, who is Luther's best friend. She discovers that he was retired because there were people who forced him to do so. She asks him to help her find Luther's whereabouts and convince him not to interfere in the case she is investigating. Martin goes to jail and enters Luther's cell trying to find anything to help him find him. He sees the message that reached Luther, and when he turned on the radio he heard the same message that reached Luther. He calls Rain and tells her what he found. He tells her that if she wants to find Luther, she must follow the radio signal. Already at this time Luther arrived at the scene. He notices that the place is for tattoos. When he knocks on the door, a person named Derek comes out to him and tells him that the place is now closed. But Luther tells him he's an officer, and suddenly Derek runs away, but Luther manages to catch him. He asked him to tell him everything. Derek tells him that he met David online and he approached him and told him all his secrets. David got private photos of Derek, and that's why he was threatening him. He is also the one who sent him the frequency device, and he forced him to broadcast through it for 24 hours, and he did not know what the broadcast contained. Luther takes away his phone. At the same time, the police arrive at the place, but when they enter, they discover that Luther has escaped. With time, Luther asks Martin to help him by tracing David's phone number, which he found on Derek's phone. Martin tells him that he is now working with the police to arrest him, but despite that he decides to help him because they are friends. But Martin goes to Rain and tells her everything, and he asks her to help Luther to find out where David is. And he tells her that they will be able to arrest the two. She agrees, and they trace the phone number until they find its location. She tells Martin to call Luther and tell him that David is at Piccadilly Circus. He actually goes there and calls the number so he can identify David. He notices that someone is answering the phone, so he discovers that person is David. But when David saw it, he took someone hostage. Luther notes that there are people on the roofs of the buildings in the place. When the clock rang, these people threw themselves from above. Meanwhile, Rain and the cops arrive and try to arrest David and Luther. But David takes advantage of the chaos and runs away, while Luther follows him while he watches him when he goes down to the train station, and he continues to chase him, but suddenly he disappears. He thought that he had boarded the moving train, but he saw him running on the train tracks, so he chased him and was able to catch him, and a fierce battle took place between them, until the policeman Jamal arrived and tried to arrest them. But David stabs him in the leg and flees. As for Luther, he stayed by Jamal's side to try to help him. Officer Freddy arrives and talks to Luther, telling him he will let him go and arrest David. With the passage of time, we discover that Rain's assistant is helping David, and he gives him all the news that is happening at the police station. But he didn't tell him that Luther had escaped from prison, so David gets angry and threatens him too because he has scandals against him. At the same time, David's assistant was running a website on the deep web, publishing the crimes they were doing, asking people to tell him new ways to kill their victims. Luther calls Rain to check on Officer Jamal's health. He tells her that the common thread among all of David's victims is that they have scandals and are afraid of being exposed. She was discussing with him about this matter, and she wanted to prolong the conversation with him so that they would find his location by tracking him, but he knew about that, so he decided to hang up and throw away his SIM card. Detective Rain calls her daughter, Anya, to check on her, telling her she will be late. Anya tells her mother that she will sleep, and when she hangs up, she goes to the kitchen to drink water, but suddenly she hears a voice calling her. She goes to find out the source of the voice, but suddenly David attacks and kidnaps her. He then sends a video of Anya to Rain asking her to get rid of Luther in exchange for her daughter's release. Meanwhile, Luther goes to Corinne's house and tells her that the person who killed her son knew many things about him and threatened him with them, and that her son was afraid of him and he gave him money so as not to expose him. He told her that the criminal had probably tried to get close to her in the previous period, and he told her that he might be in her life, and she did not know that. But she tells him that she did not recognize anyone but Tommy, and she tells him that it is impossible for him to be the criminal. As she ponders, she already suspects that Tommy may be the culprit, so she tells Luther about how she knew him. Afterwards, Rain calls Luther, asking him to meet. He was afraid that she would arrest him, but he agreed to meet her to find out what was going on. He goes to the coffee shop to meet her. When she arrives, she tells him about David's wife, telling him that she was able to know everything about him. She was deceiving him by telling him she was going to catch David and asking him to go with her. But he felt that she was lying to him and he suspected that David had something to threaten her with. He asks her to tell him what is going on. After his insistence, she tells him that David has kidnapped her daughter and they agreed to go to David's wife's place without anyone's knowledge because she suspected that there was a spy among them. They go to his wife to get information about David from her, but she refuses to talk. But when Rain tells her that David has kidnapped her daughter, she tells her where David is hiding. She decided to go with Luther to the place to save her daughter without telling the police. But her assistant finds out where Rain is going, so he calls David and tells him. So he concludes that they went to his wife and knew his whereabouts through her. He asks him to go to the hospital and kill her, and he is forced to obey his orders. When he goes to the hospital, he finds Martin and the police there. We discover that Luther is the one who asked them to go to the hospital in order to discover the traitor among them. Martin orders the police to arrest him, but he commits suicide by injecting the syringe he had brought to kill David's wife. As time passes, Rain and Luther reach the place where David is. Luther watches a frozen lake next to the house, and he notices that there are corpses inside it, but he left them and decided to complete the road in order to save Anya. When they entered the house, they heard a sound, which made Rain run into the room to find dead bodies in the room, including the body of her daughter, Anya. She breaks down, crying wildly and getting angry at Luther. She tells him that he is supposed to be killed, not her daughter. She asked him to go out and leave her. She touches her daughter's hand, but she discovers that it is not her daughter. But suddenly David's assistant walks in and strangles her with a rope while Luther is walking around the house. Suddenly David appears and beats and ties him up. After that, he does a live broadcast on the deep web and reveals his personality, and he asks the people who watch to vote on a new killing method by which he kills his victims. He tortures Luther in front of the viewers on the broadcast. Then Rain walks in and David shows her her daughter as she chokes. He gives her a knife and asks her to stab Luther in return for her daughter's life. Luther asks her to agree in order to save her daughter. Rain grabs the knife, apologizes to Luther, and stabs him, but she stabs him in such a way that he survives. Meanwhile, David handcuffs Rain instead of Luther. He gives Luther a sledgehammer and tells him to break Rain's leg. But he does not do so, and he tells the broadcast viewers that the police are following their devices and they will all be arrested. Therefore, viewers quickly exit the broadcast. Luther tells David that his wife is still alive and she watches him kill people. He also tells him that she told them everything about him. So he gets very angry and his assistant attacks Luther, but he can defend himself with the hammer in his hand. David escapes from the place and locks the doors by phone, but Luther manages to get out before the door is closed. David turns on the sprinkler system and Rain discovers it's petrol, not water. She asks David's assistant to stay away from them because they will all die, but he refuses and attacks them. She can fight him and overcome him before the place explodes. David tries to escape in his car, but Luther tries to stop him. But he drives the car too fast until the car falls into the lake. Luther grabs David's phone and opens the door for Rain and her daughter. David tries to get out of the lake, but because of the dead bodies, he is unable to, and he dies. Meanwhile, the police arrive at the scene and rescue Luther. Martin tells him that they should arrest him despite what he did, but he was injured and passed out and was taken to the hospital. When he regained consciousness, he found himself in a house. Martin tells him that he is in a house owned by the government and that there are guards, and he tells him that he will not go back to prison again. President visits him and thanks him, and he offers him a new assignment because he has proven his skill. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed the video, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe to our channel for a never-ending stream of movie magic. I will see you in the next one.